back to the status quo of just being a stateless people of permanent refugees with no natural rights whatsoever, no ability to trade with the world, no ability to come and leave. You can't have an airport, you can't have a seaport, you can't go out fishing past where some IDF guy decides you're not allowed to. So like, yeah, if Hamas laid down all their arms, perhaps Israel would stop the bombing campaign, and they would just continue subjugation forever, which has been the Likud party official policy since they were created by the terrorist Menachem Begin. Like literally since this party, that is the ruling party in Israel, was created, their goal has been that the Palestinian people never get their own state, they never get their own freedom, and that's resulted in this.
And if you don't give them their own, there's no way you can justify it. No way you can justify that a whole entire group of people never get to be a country. They don't get the rights of the Israelis. They don't get the rights of a sovereign country. They're trapped.
Yeah, nothing. Literally no rights whatsoever.
That's kind of crazy that that's being done by Israel, if you really think about it. It's kind of crazy.
Well, in a way it is. And then in another way, it's kind of not. It's kind of like there's this weird, hurt people type thing. Like when you kind of suffer this trauma, and we're speaking collectively here, so it's not exactly the same as an individual, but like you suffer this trauma, and then you use that to justify doing whatever the hell you got to do so that you never suffer that trauma again. And then you weirdly end up kind of like inflicting something on another group of people, and kind of in a weird way holding them responsible for the trauma you suffered, even though they really had very little, nothing to do with the actual trauma.
It's really an ancient kind of conflict. The Israel-Palestine is very ancient in the fact that it's like the hate between them is so strong, and they're right next door to each other, which is how people used to rock it back in the day. That was the fear of neighboring tribes, that people from the other side were going to come over and rape the women and children and kill your babies and slaughter the men.
And not like an irrational fear, like a fear based on this really happens. You know what I mean?
And it's happening in Israel. That's what's crazy.
The other thing, though, is that and that's all true. But the other thing is that, there are these examples, right, like where there's Ireland and England, and they're right next to each other, and like things are just cool now. And France and Germany are right next to each other, and they're just cool now.
But Ireland and Northern Ireland were at war with each other forever.
No, but I'm just making the point that, and then it's over. And now they're not at war anymore. And like Egypt went to war with Israel 4 times. Between the it was 1948, 56, 67, and 72 or 73.
Did I say that wrong? Was Ireland at war with Northern Ireland?
Yeah, because they were
Southern Ireland.
They were the British controlled.
Right.
But
it was really England.
Yes, it was by proxy, England basically dominating the Irish. And then, by the way, the Irish turned to terrorism when they were being dominated by the English.
Shocker.
And which is another thing that real interesting.
You have to do it. It's the only way to go to war.
Well, look,
if you have a smaller army and they have all the money, you got to figure out a way to get them.
Well, here's the craziest part of this, right? Is that, and we talked a bunch about the history of this last time I was on, but I don't think I mentioned this. Maybe I did. But the craziest part of all of it is that the Israelis, I shouldn't say the Israelis 5 seconds before they became Israelis, like right before the creation of the state of Israel, they embraced terrorism. And by the way, these terrorists, who were the leaders of these terrorist organizations, like Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir, they went on to be prime ministers of Israel, but they were terrorists. And I'm not like, I don't mean this is a pejorative, like self-described terror. Like they embraced terrorism.
What was their organization called?
Menachem Begin's was the Irgun. That was his militia, and then there was Lehi, or the Stern Gang, and then there was the Haganah, who was like the biggest one. And they were not quite as terroristic, but they also were involved in a bunch of it. And their justification for it was to drive out the occupying force, which was the British at the time. After World War II, the Zionists who were in Palestine had enough of the British occupying the area, and they were very angry because they had limited Jewish migration during the run-up to the Holocaust. So they had a real beef with the British at this point, even though the British had kind of like allowed them to have a chance to establish a Jewish homeland there. But so they embraced terrorism to drive them out. You can go look up the King David Hotel, killed a whole bunch of innocent people, including Jews, in the hotel, because they just wanted to use terrorism to drive out an occupying force. And they actually introduced terrorism into that region. And many of the same tactics that the Palestinians went on to embrace were stuff that they picked up from the Jewish terrorists at that time. But then the same Israelis will turn around and be like, well, I don't know why these Palestinians have embraced terrorism. And like they're telling you it's for the same reasons, to drive out an occupying force. Now, of course, the major difference there is that Israelis came to stay. Whereas the British were there, they had this was a satellite. They had their home country back in Europe, and they could be driven out. It's a whole different thing to try to drive someone out who's like, no, we're setting up our homes here. And
there's more of us.
Yeah, well, not that much. I mean, there's Palestinians and Israelis is pretty close. If you count all of them.
Well, you're also backed by America.
Well, that's the major difference. Well, and that's basically my essential argument is that America shouldn't be playing this role.
Well, this is being argued out now.
Yeah.